okay to make those mistakes. They might be expensive mistakes, but the good thing is you'll probably just make them once. Like, you adapted and tweaked things going forward. So I think if anybody's listening and they're maybe thinking, oh no, I'm doing things a bit wrong, or you're going to change and iterate on your business as you grow and become more mature. So it's okay to make mistakes, but hopefully you learn from them and put measures in place to prevent them from happening again.
Hello and welcome to Creativity for Sale podcast, a show to help you start and grow your life-changing creative career and business. My name is Radim Malinic and creativity changed my life. You see, I believe creativity can change your life too. I even wrote a book about it and it inspired this podcast. I've set out to interview the world's most brilliant creatives, designers, writers, musicians, makers and marketeers about their life-changing experiences with creativity. If you ever wanted to know how people go from their humble beginnings to the pinnacle of their success, our conversation should provide you with an intimate look into triumphs, challenges and untold stories behind their creative endeavors. We also discuss the highs and lows of creative careers and creative life. So, thank you for joining me on this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation, and the boundless potential within us all. Let creativity change your life. Are you ready? Today's guest has become the go-to insurance broker for many freelancers and small creative businesses. She's been providing necessary products and insurance packages and even education for those who don't often seem to think about possibilities of what might go wrong sooner rather than later. It doesn't matter what your creative pursuit or title is, I'm sure you will find our conversation very useful indeed. A former wedding photographer turned into indispensable insurance broker, it's my pleasure to introduce Ashley Baxter.
Hello.
Hi Ashley, how are you doing?
I'm great. It's so good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm delighted to have you on the show. You're I believe my second Scottish guest, obviously after the trademark Craig Black, who's been flying the creative Scottish flag pretty much everywhere all the time, which obviously quite rightfully so. It's nice to have you on the show, and I'm sorry you've been booked second.
No, that's fine. I mean, I can imagine the conversation with Craig was very interesting. He's so talented.
Craig lives and breathes what he does. He's literally a poster boy for creativity and business and manifestation. But yeah, enough about Craig. How are you doing? It's nice to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be here. You and I have met in person a couple of times, but it's been a while, definitely pre-COVID, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I believe I may have met you. I can't remember where. I think I saw you once in Scotland, in Aberdeen.
Yeah, so that was at the Meet Conf, wasn't it?
The Meet Conference. Yeah, shouts out to Cameron Duthie.
I loved that conference.
That was amazing. It's such a shame those boys.
It was so good.
They couldn't do it again because there was so much money.
I know.
And because it's it's a tricky subject of putting something on.
I know, but it feels like we never get conferences like that in Scotland. So I don't know if that contributed to my personal enjoyment of that event, but I just loved the whole experience. It was a really good vibe, good people, great talks. So that's where I first met you. And then the second time was when I was doing a talk in London. What was that called again? Design, the business?
I think design and business, yeah.
And that probably was about 2018. So yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, I remember that was such an interesting setting. And it always requires someone's initiative and then a lot of work to actually make it happen, just because those things just don't happen easy. Just nothing that we see everything that the shiny outcome of what's happening. And then that it's like, as someone said, it's like a swan. It looks sort of serene on the water, but it paddles manically under the water to stay afloat, just to move about.
Yeah, I know. Are you talking about the process of putting on events like that?
Yeah.
It's not for me. I've never done it before, and I just don't think I have the organisational skills to do it. You would be good at it, seeing as you know so many people.
I think I'll stick to the podcast. I mean, I literally have like an hour a day to do this, and then I'm paddling under water, trying my best to do this.
If you don't mind me asking, outside of the podcast, what are you working on right now?
I've got 3 different avenues at the moment. Thanks for asking me the first question as opposed to me asking you the first question. I like it. So yeah, I've still run a brand new studio. I've scaled down the operation just to work with core roster of clients, just on enjoyable projects that they span a couple of years. So that's part of my process at the moment, because I actually have not said yes to any new clients for about, 16 months now.
Wow.
So that's a long time. Yeah, I've built for 20 years, I've built a sort of core roster. And 16 months ago, about more than a year ago, I decided that I was going to make 2 books and try to build my book publishing business, rebuild it again. And I couldn't do these 2 things together because I had a staff, and in the past, I was paying, comes with that, pensions and insurance and national insurance and kind of stuff. And it gets busy because we only have sort of one sort of mental headspace, and just to build that with young family, and it was getting a bit too much. And book business was doing really well in the past. So it's almost as much as you put into it, you get back out. It's never like you put £1 and you get £100 return for nothing.
Yeah.
And so publishing business is like another 35-40%. And then we are starting a small coffee company, which...
I love coffee.
Yeah, everyone loves coffee. But we're trying to sort of build a coffee for creative moment. I know this sounds a little bit like a BS alert, but it's more about how to bring specialty coffee to creative people and people who are interested in good coffee, but don't necessarily know which farm or which blend or which single origin to go for. So we try to create this thing where it actually helps you to discover things through more of a sort of personal match to the coffee profile and the mood. Because when it comes to specialty coffee, it's incredible. It's just the difference is so much better.
Wow. So into like a product business now, from client work to publishing to product stuff.
Yeah. Look, I'm writing a book about how to do actually a product on the internet, or how to create automated income, because as you know, you go up to these talks and you got some old dog talking about, look, I'm done with client work now. I'm like, look, I'm sitting here in the audience as a fresh rookie and you're telling me how to not do client work. Can you tell us how to actually get ahead of us? So there's going to be a book currently titled Turn Dust into Gold. It's one of my chapters from original book. Turn Dust into Gold in a way of creating automated sort of business of product, and just how to do it, where to look for margins. It's going to be quite dry, but it's going to be very functional, because I think we've all got all these breadcrumbs everywhere around us, and claiming ignorance is just not quite right.
Yeah. To me, you really epitomize the whole, you define creativity.
Thank you.
You've done it all and dipped your toe. You've got so much experience as well. So it's really, that's why you should be writing books and doing talks and doing this podcast.
Well, thank you for the reaffirmation that I'm doing something right. That's very good. Well, and to my listeners, welcome to WithJack, creative podcast. Thank you, Ashley. Thanks for all my questions. But I think what I would love to do, talk about ignorance. I think ignorance, is a topic that very much goes with what you do. And in fact, ignorance may be a lack of knowledge, because if we claim ignorance, sometimes that's not necessarily the right word. So you and I, as you introduced us and talked through the introduction, how we met, I very much enjoyed your talk in 2018. And I'm not sure if I had already signed up with your insurance company or was about to sign up on the back of your talk. But it was an eye-opener, because I've been doing this for more than 22, 23, depends on how I remember the stuff, more than 20 plus years. And for most of my professional time, my freelance time, I never had a contract. I was winging it. I was just happy that if people paid, if it was somehow agreed, people didn't pay, sometimes we've written off the losses and stuff. But the sums were sometimes insignificant. If someone didn't pay me 20 years ago, £200 for a logo, I can still hold my grudge against them 20 years later, but I'm not going to pursue it in the law of court. But when things get bigger, obviously you realize, okay, I need to protect myself while I'm doing, obviously, what's the sort of safety policy, because things get, you grow up in the world and you need to change the way you do business. Because I love this quote at the moment, which says, what got you here won't get you there. Means what I was doing 20 years ago is absolutely invalid and obsolete to how I'm doing business 20 years later. So insurance was something, when I listened to your sort of explanation, how it actually works, what do I need to do with it? Because it was all of a sudden like the kind of floodgates of knowledge about insurance open. I was like, oh shit, that is so important. And I think I signed up straight the next day and told everyone to to do this. And I was very impressed with how you've set up the product to be accessible and tailored to the micro niche of creatives. Because if you look at the big companies like Hiscox or whoever else, it's crazy. You don't know where to turn and what to do. So let's go back to the start of your journey. What motivates you to hang up your camera and let the wedding people be photographed by somebody else, the bride and groom, and start insurance company?
I think a few things led to starting my own insurance company. I was working in insurance when I was doing wedding photography on the side. I was figuring out what I wanted my next step to be. I enjoyed photography, but I don't know, after doing weddings for several years, I was finding myself enjoying it less and less. And it's one of those things where I don't want to take people's money off them if I'm not, 100% present and giving it my all. So I also felt like with wedding photography, there's always like a ceiling. Not that I'm a hugely money-oriented person, but there's always a ceiling. You're only ever going to earn as much money as you're physically there shooting and able to do. So I liked that idea of having a business that could grow beyond that. Like I said, I was already working in insurance at the time, but it wasn't insurance for freelancers. It wasn't business insurance. It was a completely separate thing. And so I just started playing around with starting, because I had been a photographer and I'd had this experience of buying insurance, a really terrible experience. Like I had no idea what it was that I'd purchased. I just remember, hitting the checkout button and crossing my fingers and hoping that I'd got the right thing, but also praying that I would never have to find out if I had the right cover. I'd never have to find out if I was in a situation where I needed to use it. So I wanted to start something that simplified insurance for creatives. At the time, there weren't any providers that were solely focused on creatives, which is why you mentioned like Hiscox and various other providers. They have these products and they're trying to market them to small tech businesses with multiple employees or estate agents or solicitors or people like us, creative freelancers. And what you end up with is you're never able to articulate what exactly this product does and how it helps people. So I think with us being so niche and so focused on freelancers, we're able to pull out all of the relevant bits of the policy and talk about them in a way that resonates with you. Like you were saying, when you heard me speak at that conference, you finally understood how it worked and how it applied to you. And that's what we were trying to do. So yeah, it started with WithJack back in, it was 2016 I launched. So we've been going for a while now. But what I will say is it's very difficult to sell insurance to freelancers. So I'm hoping that conversations like this continue to educate them about how it can benefit them, because when it works, it's one of the best things in the world. But the problem that we have is that so many freelancers don't understand how it works.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. It reminds me of a quote of hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And I think we all hope for the best and think that the worst will never come. I think that's what happens because, yeah, as I said, I was blissfully sailing unsecure and luckily nothing terrible happened. But yeah, what you say about selling insurance to freelancers, it's almost like you don't know what you don't know. And only when a problem happens, you start searching for solutions. I think it's almost like, how do we get people to understand it quicker? So I've got a couple of car crash examples, which I will talk to you about, which I think will potentially explain some of the products that you do. So my first example, if it's okay, let's talk about late payments, because late payments is chronic. We like to tell ourselves in the creative industry, it's only us, like it only affects us. But I think I read an article in The Guardian saying that pretty much 44,000 businesses are likely to go out of business because of the cash flow problems. It's like a knock-on effect. People pay you late, you pay late other people, and it's a big problem. So it's not just the freelancers. You're not like the unique, the unicorns going, sorry, if my universe is just us. And it can feel that way, of course, because you feel like, how come the agencies get in the money? But when you look at it as a sort of full circle, having been freelancer in the past and now running the agency, it's quite tricky to sometimes manage the cash flow because running a business is not easy, cheap, quick or effortless. So I can now see like, oh, why was I paid a month later from an agency and stuff? But when it comes to dealing with clients, because that's your, especially direct clients, I think that the late payment product is the most suitable product that there is for the issue. So I remember being in a situation where I thought, even though thought I had some understanding of the late payment product. It's like, oh, I'm sure if my client doesn't pay, there's a magic pot of money that the insurance will help me. I will get paid by the insurance. And then you realize, actually, I had it all wrong, because there's no magic pot of money that will recoup the loss of income. For those who don't know, how does the product work?
Okay, so firstly, I just want to say the issue with late payments or non-payment, for me, it doesn't actually have anything to do with the size of the invoice, because earlier you were saying when it was a smaller invoice, it was frustrating, but you were willing to write it off. I want to create products that actually prevent people from wanting to take advantage of freelancers. I want them to realize that they cannot take advantage of us easily because we are coming for them. So I want to stop people from thinking freelancers are vulnerable, they're there to be taken advantage of. That's kind of my goal. Now, I understand where your confusion arose from with that product, because there's two products that we have that can assist with non-payment, but under two different circumstances. Under the professional indemnity policy, there is a mitigation costs clause, and this is where the insurer will pay the amount that is owed to you by your client if they're not paying, but only if it's accompanied with a threat of legal action or something else that would trigger the professional indemnity policy. So some people can find it difficult to differentiate between the different products because they're complex products, but there is cover for unpaid invoices under professional indemnity where the insurer will pay you. There is a pot of money, they will pay you what's owed to you, but only if it's accompanied with something that would trigger your professional indemnity policy.
Could we have an example? What could that trigger be?
Yeah, of course. So professional indemnity claims usually arise when clients are dissatisfied with the service that you've provided, and perhaps you've delivered something late. They've then went on to miss a launch date and they're refusing to pay you. And we've had things like clients threatening to bring legal action against you if you continue to pursue them for payment. Or we've had a client, there was one issue with scope creep where the client misunderstood what the developer was actually creating for them. And at the end of the project, he felt like he didn't get the work that he expected to get. And he refused to pay the developer for the work that they'd done. And because there was a dispute with work, they also threatened legal action against the developer for breach of contract and whatnot. Provided there's a situation that triggers the professional indemnity policy and it's accompanied with a refusal to pay you, then there is a pot of money. But we tend to find that those are only very extreme situations, and they're quite rare as well. So the product that you're talking about is the legal expenses product, and this has a debt recovery service where a solicitor will chase your overdue payments on your behalf. There are a few caveats, like off the top of my head, I think the invoice has to be over £200, and I think it's limited to UK and EU invoices. So I think that was one of the problems you had. I might be wrong. I think your client was abroad. It can be really difficult for them to pursue payment from clients abroad. I think the whole legal process just changes depending on what jurisdiction the client's in. So for our products, it's limited to UK and EU. So the issue that we tend to find is maybe something you felt you experienced in that situation when you tried to use the service, is that freelancers get a little bit jumpy the second that we mention anything legal. The second we mention there's a solicitor involved, they're a bit like, oh, I just want to get paid. I don't want to go down that legal route. And also the second you involve solicitors, I'm not going to lie, the process becomes lengthy, right? You know what it's like with legal services. It's not a quick fix. It does take time. So it's what I tend to suggest people use just in extreme situations where they've exhausted all other avenues. But off the back of what happened to you, where I think you ended up using a third-party service, off the back of that, I decided that WithJack should launch low-hanging fruit type of service. It's not a legal service, so we don't have to sit and pour over your contract to make sure you've done the work that you said you were going to do. We don't have to look into your client's finances. And it's just where we simply provide a credit control service where we're chasing your invoices on your behalf. So it means that it's one less thing you have to worry about. But we do also find that with a lot of clients, having a third party involved suddenly to chase your invoices for you, it frightens them and they're likelier to pay. And we've had a lot of success with that. So that's something that we launched off the back of your experience. Did I get that right about your experience?
Absolutely. And what I'll do, actually, I'll tell you obviously what I've gone through in detail, because what you describe it actually makes perfect sense, because I was in a situation where a client slipped the onboarding process because it was work that was done really quickly. There was short deadline, quick negotiations, no contract was signed. And at that time, I had a template. I was issuing the work because everything was around, let's say, the 25 grand mark for a new project. So the contract was always in place just to even make us look a little bit more professional. And there was no contract. The work went really quickly. We got paid part of the sum because, as it transpired, the company was pretty much a professional money ower. Like, they owed money to everyone and everything. Staff, employee, same thing, staff, contractors, suppliers. They played a high gamble. And I think just because of COVID, they've lost some of their events they were supposed to run, and then the money wasn't coming in. And even there was a sort of high profile investors in the business. Yeah, it was a little bit of a shoddy operation. So whilst the founders were sitting at home in their multi-million pound houses, the suppliers weren't being paid. So we got partial payment, and they were being a bit silly about paying the rest of the payment, which was only about a deposit. I think we agreed just to pay even half, just get that balance cleared and let's do this. And they were not. So after a few emails, which obviously I've got my templates on like how to escalate things, and you threaten, look, I'm going to pass it over to a debt collecting agency, And usually at that point, as you quite rightly said earlier, people start paying attention. If you say, I'm going to hand it over to whatever entity you can even make up that can work, reminds me of a friend who set up literally a debt collector credit control. Literally, they just were sending the letters themselves under a different entity. So they've set up let's say, Storbad and Brown debt collectors, and and people start paying attention. It's like, hey, look, your invoice is unpaid. And unfortunately, your friend that working for you is unhappy, so pay them. And that gets people start paying attention, which is good. So because at that time, you didn't have a product of chasing, actually working in credit control. So I appointed debt collecting agency. And I was quite impressed because they've guided me through quite a bit of the process. So one of the things was what you described with the mitigation for indemnity. Like, my client agreed to work being absolutely fine, and that they agreed to the invoice. That was really important. Saying, is there an invoice? Are you happy with the work? Yeah, there was no problem. So which was like a massive tick. Like, there is no dispute about the work. There's no dispute about the invoice. There's just a dispute about the payment. So they managed to get a payment plan from the client. And for a while, they were like doing the weekly payments, which was fine. Obviously, then they stopped. And then my debt collecting agency was on commission. So I think it was like 10% from what the people know, whatever they managed to recoup, I paid them 10% on top. Not on top, like from the money. So let's say if I got £500, that's £50 in a commission on that. So that was the process. And then it stopped, and she started looking at escalation. Okay, so what do we do next? And this is where having a debt becomes not only cumbersome and inconvenient, but also expensive, because to start the legal proceedings to take them to the CCJ, is that right? CCJ? County Court Judgment, which is basically to legally certify they owe you money. That's like, okay, so you need to pay us and you need to prepay the legal fees. And all of a sudden you're looking at a bill of £1,000 or nearly £1,000. You're like, this debt is going to cost me money before I get any money. And then you get the caveat like, okay, even though if the county court judgment says that they owe you money, which is they don't have to pay it. And you're like, oh my freaking word. So then you have to appoint bailiff to go. And it's just, oh my, you know what? I think I'm going to throw my hat in. I think I'm done here, because all of a sudden it costs you money. And then obviously as a company, you get other callers. They're like, hey, we run this differently. We are a different debt collecting agency. I'm like, yeah, we can guarantee the money. Like, if you got a sales guy who tries to sell you a product, like, we don't do commission, we charge on top, and you only pay us like a yearly fee to do this. I'm like, you know what? Let's give it one more shot. It was like a nominal fee of, let's say, £250 a year to pursue as many invoices as you want. But obviously, they're all salespeople. They're like, we can't guarantee your money. I'm like, well, your sales guy was pretty much saying, you know what? We've looked at their finance, we run a credit check. I wish I was as poor as your clients. Like, we can do this. But then you just speak to someone like, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to send them letters. We're going to introduce ourselves. So how are you different? They're like, oh, we're more robust. Like, we call them all the time. Like, it only takes 10 seconds to block your number because you can't call anyone. Our product is very much alike from most of the debt collecting agencies. It just depends on from my personal experience, on the tone of voice, on the authority, like how authoritative your company is. It depends on the branding as well. It just depends on if you're some scrappy company or some in the stakes to some flashy address. And it just depends like how much of a threat do you come to the company.
Yeah. And I will say that what's different about the insurance product, the legal expenses product with the late payment, the debt recovery service is similar to debt collection companies. But the difference with your insurance is that at the end of that process, if your client hasn't paid you, the insurer, assuming the claim's covered under the policy, the insurer will help you pursue them through small claims court as well. And the cost of that's covered under your policy. But to be completely transparent, we've yet to have a claim reach that stage. Like the debt recovery service, where the insurers covered the claim, they have been able to recover the money prior to that stage. So we've yet to get there. But yeah, it's definitely a tricky problem that I think needs a better solution. I have a question for you as somebody who has a lot of experience billing clients. Do you find that having certain payment milestones or structuring payments in a certain way can help with that? Like, for example, instead of just sending maybe an invoice for a deposit to book the project and then a final invoice at the end of it, do you find invoicing more regularly eliminates the likelihood of a client not paying or eliminates the likelihood of you missing out on a lot of money due to non-payment? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I feel very fortunate to be in a position where I've graduated from that shit show school of mid-career business, if that makes sense, because I just feel like every career starts knee deep in the mud and then it gets a bit better and a bit easier and then a little bit easier and everything changes. And then someone once described to me that parenting doesn't get easier, it just gets different. There's a different issue. So chasing people for smaller parts of money in the past, if you're billing £200 or £300 or £500 not 5 times a week, you've got 5 invoices to chase. Whereas the billings, the frequency that's slower for what we do now. And we have a trusted partners. Actually, I invoice people in advance. I don't chase new clients that much anymore, as I told you at the top of this conversation. We have very much established connections with our clients and with their companies. So sometimes it takes quite a while to get a PO for pre-procurement. It takes usually the waiting time, because once the invoice goes on a company system, it's paid within 24 hours. So luckily, and I count myself very lucky, and I feel like that's my sort of dividend for 20 years of crap on and off, that I've got clients who pay us what we want to be paid, when we want to be paid, and they pay as soon as they get the work or as soon as they get the invoice. But that's literally, I feel like that's a life dividend for sticking with this for 20 years, because it wasn't always that easy. So to answer your question for someone, because obviously to get to this position, I feel as a dividend, I've really had to earn this, because you don't get these clients straight away. Because it also depends on how worthy you are, of how much you deliver, how much is your service. Because from my experience, if someone tries to launch a new physical product or digital product, their head is all over the place. And usually they're scrappy, they're kind of like the freelancer trying to do their own thing. They don't necessarily think about being on time, spending or billing invoices, because it's a question of respect. If you condone yourself, I'm not saying that freelancers don't do it right, but if you condone yourself professionally and say, look, to start this work, this is 50% deposit. Let's do this. I mean, that should be a standard. And for example, when it comes to development work, for example, let's say we work on e-commerce projects. When the work is signed up for development, we get paid. Literally, I tell people, look, I have to pay the development team. We have to do this. Of course, we don't have to, but that money is locked in. And now it's actually the ball is in our court, making sure we deliver on time. But all of this depends how you carry yourself, how you think about it, how you verbalize this problem. Because I've had freelancers who send me an invoice with the final work. Well, thanks for the invoice, but the work is wrong. You can't get ahead of yourself too much. And I very much talk about it in Creativity for Sale in the book, like the stages of, okay, when is it the right time to invoice? When is the right time to chase the invoice? People have found, which is really interesting, is that you get freelancers with I've got 3-day payment terms. Well, that's great, but I've never heard of it. Or 10 days. Oh, I'm chasing the invoice. I'm like, you haven't even delivered the work and you're already chasing your invoice. Or you deliver the work a month later and you're chasing the invoice 4 days later. I'm like, we didn't agree this. I don't have a sort of a magic buffer of cash that we can just give it to you because the client's pissed off because it's late. We are not exactly happy. And it's about being a human, about how you carry yourself through the business and how you communicate, because that great Carnegie Hall Institute, whatever. But there's a quote that 85% of your success is how you communicate, innovate, carry yourself, who your personality is, and only 15% of your success is your technical skills.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But it's how that is, because your work can be let down by how you communicate, how you set up your terms, because it can be so intoxicating to get work for what you do. So I feel like with freelancing or with creative work, and it's like a 2-part job. You put your expression out there, like, okay, I'm going to do work which is creative. I put my soul into it, and also have to run it like a business. Because a solicitor, or let's say debt collector, be like, okay, here's the invoice, here's the phone call, here's the outcome, goodbye. No one can say, listen, Jerry, who made up Jerry, is it? Like, Jerry, you didn't make that phone call really good. Did you speak to him? Did you follow my brief? Did you tell him here's the money? No one's going to ask Jerry how he does his work. Whereas with creative work, there's so many ifs and buts and possibilities that we really sort of overload the emotional side of how we run our businesses, because we think that what we create is of the highest value, of the highest expression. We get married to the first idea, thinking that's the best thing ever. And we spend more time being emotionally unbalanced before it comes to the payment. So then you had people like, let's say they wouldn't pay, or they say, well, I don't like the work, I'm not happy with this. The emotional side kicks in, and you're like, you start seeing red, and I'm like, well, I've done everything you told me to do. And we become very much emotionally triggered freelancer creative, rather than, listen, there's contracts, there's conditions, there's the brief, there's the delivery. And if it gets to the stages when client is unhappy and doesn't want to pay, there's something in the middle didn't work out, like something you didn't put right into place, because it's safeguarding of the outcome. And I think you have to knock off your feet a few times to actually understand that, you know what, there's no need to be emotional about this business, because if you put your ego towards the back and don't think that you've created the next masterpiece worthy of a spot in a V&A museum, then, okay, have I done my work? Have I done this right? Have I answered the brief? Have I put the right positioning in place? Is my work not competing with that sort of competition? There's so many checkpoints that can be so totally missed, especially at the beginning of our careers, because we think, I'm getting paid to do my hobby. I'm getting paid to be happy. I'm getting paid for all of this. I'm not getting paid now. What's going on? So I think that emotional side of running a business can easily take over our sort of decision process and our communications. And we are sometimes a little bit sort of naive and rookie, because you might have the same match on the other side. Someone might be 20 years old and try to start a startup or a business. So you get a couple of not very knowledgeable parties trying to fight it off in a very bad style. It's like a pub fight, at 11 o'clock. After too many, and sort of liquid anesthetics. And I think this whole process is like, we need to spend more time about knowing what we don't know, so we can be better rounded article, more multifaceted article to be ready for this. Because if you get someone in a different position, they need to learn, let's say they create a cosmetics product. So they need to know about the production. They need to know about the FSA certification. They need to know about what's in there. What is the sort of legal implications of selling the product in the market? Like how to package it, how to sell it, like what's they've got so much more layers into this. And no one can say, well, you didn't tell me what I should and shouldn't do, like it's for us to know, like how even the simple way of getting paid, like how to have an insurance, how to have a contract. Because you said in your conversation, like the contract is good to have. The contract's not going to get you out of trouble. The contract is a piece of paper just to say, this happened, we agreed to do this, and this is our conditions. And people say, I've got a contract, I'm covered. No, you're not. Like, this is literally like,
no. Yeah, nothing stops the client from bringing a claim against you, or you can even breach your contract and that leads to a claim being brought against you. I think something you said earlier about a freelancer's mindset being like, oh, I'm getting paid to do my hobby. Sometimes I think that's part of the problem. I think from day one, we need to shift our mindset as freelancers and really treat this like a business. And that does mean getting yourself a contract, getting yourself insured, And even the way you communicate with clients as well. Because I've noticed that a lot of people, when they come to me with problems with a client, they'll say, well, I threw this extra work in for free just because the client was being nice. And not in every situation, but suddenly the client's going, well, I've now got more work than I expected. Freelancer isn't adhering to the original project scope or the original terms. So where do we stop from here? I'm just going to keep asking for more and more work. And before you know it, there's a whole can of worms that's been opened and the freelancer's in a really difficult situation. So I think like changing your mindset, approaching it like a business and getting everything, kind of getting all your ducks in a row from day one is not going to completely eliminate problems because there are always going to be difficult clients out there, but it is going to help you handle those problems better when they arise.
Absolutely. If there's one tip I can suggest to people, it's one tip for me now, but working on a sort of itemized brief sometimes creates a lot of trouble going, where's the business card? Where's the letterhead? Where's the poster? Where's this? And I think with freelancers, it's more like it's like tradie. Like I've always feel like freelancer is like a tradie. Like, okay, my pipe is broken. I need a plumber. My logo is broken. I need a logo designer. It's kind of like a very singular sort of exchange of work. Whereas when you start selling your work as services, it's much like, especially like how to build a house. You need multiples of different skills or disciplines to actually create the work. And what I tell our clients or how we build right now is that they say, okay, we need X, Y, Z done. And they say, I need X, Y, Z done. And I'll say, okay, we've got a day rate, which is a studio rate, which is 8 hours. And I assume that it's going to take 3 days to create. And obviously, we've got 24 hours to do it, 24 working hours. And obviously, that the client knows that obviously the time will take that. And let's say within a day and a half, they're like, actually, we've got changes. We're going to change this. And we go, no, are you? And I'm like, okay, cool. So we're still well within your time. There's not a problem. And I think it's such an easy way, again, like the emotional battle with the client is so easy to get in because they realize that what they've started, they've visualized it. Oh, now we see it. Actually, this is not quite right. We need to change our minds. But the freelancer or the designer is not going to change their mind. They're like, oh, we actually, you know what? I'm happy to change this for you. Because what they feel, they're getting paid for that one block, So like, you fixed that leaky pipe, but actually there's a bigger hole just up the pipe. I'm sure the plumber metaphors are rife on this podcast. And you're like, but you asked me to fix this pipe. Well, it's not my hole up there. Like the hole up there is not my problem. Whereas if you say, look, you've got me here for 8 hours. Like this will take me 8 hours. Actually, it will take me 3 hours and you got 5 hours spare. I'm happy to look at this. I'm happy to look at that. And I'm happy to actually just look at the pipes that you told me where the leak is. But if you want me to check around the house, if there's any other problems, I'm happy to do it. And then it becomes a broader conversation because from most of the projects we've done in the last 5 years, the work was very little about the logo. The work was very little about the original problem. It was very little about the original point of conversation because you open the patient and you find out, okay, this is what needs to happen. This is what needs to be fixed. This is actually what we can improve on your conversation. Actually, we can build a better product as a result of a conversation. So when you see the freelance work as sort of interchange, like when you go like a transactional, when you see the work as transactional, it's very easy to be very transactional about the detail. Whereas when you hold yourself more authoritative and more knowledgeable and go in, I listen to your problem. This is my services. This is the outcome. This is what we can do for you as a broader package. Then it becomes easier because everyone's more at ease. Because I found with clients that more you explain to them what's in the process, the more you explain to them what you need to do to get to the from A to B to Z, they become more at ease with knowing what's going to happen. They stop counting their money. They stop worrying about what's going to happen. And it just gets much, much easier to get paid and just to deliver a project.
So are you saying that your approach, just so I can understand this correctly, your approach has been more so to say to clients, like, here's what we do and here's the amount of time you have us for. And that means that if the project does change scope, which we find happens a lot, that you're easily adaptable to that and then it minimizes problems or conflict around scope changes and payment. Is that correct?
100%. Yeah, 100%. So if someone comes, let's say for a branding package, let's say they want that cosmetic product from an idea to an online e-commerce store, there's going to be lots of changes. Things will change. Things will have to be amended, adapted to the situation that will come inevitably down the road. And I just see this I sell time more than the individual itemized billings, because I've seen internal quotes from agencies. They're like $2,000 for Twitter template and that one. And it gets messy. Like, it just literally, then you give people reasons to start splitting hairs. Whereas if you say, look, I've got your back, I can make my studio available for a week for you. And I think that's what's really good. You say, look, this will take 2 weeks over the course of 3 months. You pay us for 2 weeks of time for the block of, so that's 80 hours. They can do whatever they want. If they want us to come to their offices and sing, hallelujah, whatever, we can do that because we've been paid for it. So it's been more about flexible and actually having conversations with people and saying, look, we know you tell us what you think you want, and we're going to help you to get the right stuff to build the product. I always say, like, people come to creatives saying, look, I really want a car. Great. We can build you one. Okay. What do you want now? They're like, maybe a steering wheel and a couple of seats, just see how it goes. But you need a lot more than that. Like, you need a lot more parts, a lot more process, a lot more thought and more strategy into actually delivering this project, because it's not that simple. But people see it from transactional value, because I can say that for a long time, I've been trying to master the process of, like, how we can package this stuff, how we can deliver this, how we speak to people. I thought for a while, like, look, I finally got it. Let's say 5 or 6 years ago, like, I finally got it. And then me and my wife were trying to renovate our house, and we had a great builder. He was helping us with all he was asking me all the questions. I was making all the decisions. But then me and my wife went to the bathroom shop that I wasn't prepared for. Like, you scour Pinterest for everything. You're like, okay, this is what I want. And this bathroom shop was saying, look, we only start projects at $5,000 and that's our minimum spend. Okay, well, let's have a chat. I didn't know what I want. There was a restriction. There was a space restriction. And I turned into an idiot client. Like, maybe put a shelf in there, I was throwing everything at it. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm a patient zero here. Literally, I'm the case study of an idiot going, anything, anyhow, because the person on the other side wasn't guiding us to the right result, to the right idea, because she didn't have the constraints from us, because we were like, nah, maybe, sink. We need a sink. We need a bath, tiles. And then you also have which tiles, what size, what color. And it's like, I need to be better prepared for this. But if you try to sell me tiles in a bath, I don't know which way it's going. I'm not going to pay you for it. But I'm not going to commit to this because I'm not really sure what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. I just felt the process wasn't clear. And I was very much almost stunned by how I failed to get any process in the way. Had to do a lot more sort of finding and planning and reference finding and planning of, like, how I can actually get the space properly done. And it took a lot longer. So it's all about a communication of, like, how do we get the other side to fully understand? Because, as you know, if you can work with people every day, you can be with your partner every day, and you can still have moments in the day when you go cross wires. And when you've got clients on the other side of the world and different cultures, different everything, way of conducting a business, so much can go amiss. And you can't say, well, it worked with my friend Gary down the road to someone in Brazil. And it's really like the personal and business growth is for me, like, so much more important than following the latest Adobe features and, spending time on generative AI, because I found from writing these 2 books, the kind of personal audits of my personal and business skills, like what has led me to this sort of situation where actually I can say, what, I can enjoy this now. Like, we've done a lot of hard work of learning, growing, getting knocked back, getting knocked down, picking ourselves up and just thinking, there's some pattern recognition in this. I don't think we should be doing it the same way as we did before, because we're not going to get far doing it the same way.
So do you still provide a client with a statement of work, or is it just more of a general, instead of itemizing what they can expect, is it more just a general design and build? Or do you know what I mean? I suppose I'm just trying to understand how explicit you are with your clients about what they're going to get, just because we find like loads of our issues between freelancers and clients stem from like lack of communication or misunderstanding. So I just want to understand how you approach that, because you are very flexible and they're booking out your time. Do you provide them with a statement of work that itemizes what they're getting, or is it just more general?
We do have a sort of a deliverables list, because I mean, there's an original contract with every client in place for providing services. So that it can just essentially like that there's a clause for a brief that sort of can be added. It's an addition. You're like, okay, at this point we did X, Y, Z. But what happens with our clients now that often they come with a problem or a shape of a problem and say, okay, we need this solved or we need this provided. So let's say we do a campaign imagery for an ice cream brand. So we know what the flavors are, we know what the colors are, we know what the size and knob we need to do, the kind of stuff. So we go, okay, we're going to do this. So it's depending on this. And sometimes they can say, okay, the flavors change. Like there's some, like you go a sort of scope of amending the product or like amending the outcome. Like we can do that. But what they normally do, they would, at that time when they commission the work, they provide a PO which says, we want this X, Y, Z done. So there's always some form of communication, some form of document to say, that's the work, that's what we're doing. And I'm very lucky that we've got such a deep relationship with these clients that they really respect what we do and we respect what they want from us. It becomes a little bit easier to do this. So I think in my life, in my sort of professional life, I think wrote like one statement of work that didn't go anywhere. We normally provide quite sort of detailed estimates which say what goes in the process. So sometimes some people do proposals. So they spend copying and pasting some information about a client and how the work's going to go and stuff. Whereas from experience, I know that people don't read. If people want to see pretty pictures,
Tell me about it. Yeah, I know that.
I think that's just, for someone who writes, who's got a publishing business, like I know people don't read anything over 300 words. And that's sometimes not 300 words too many. So it's about effectiveness. We don't do tenders because that's way too many pages for my liking. So we itemize what we're going to do. We don't have to commit to every single sort of part because there is a process. I feel like with creative work, it's like an equation from start to finish. Now, if this adds with this, if these things add up, you get the right outcome. If you fail in one part, it's not going to add up. It's literally as simple as that. So what I would suggest, like, it's some form of like just a reference document is good to have. You can just have someone to say in an itemized email to say, because email is a legal form of communication that you can submit to a court if you needed to.
Yeah, like it's so important to have that audit trail.
Yeah, absolutely. So just having it written when people say, yeah, I'm happy, like just reply to me, you're happy. Just if you're happy for me to go ahead.
Yeah.
My accountant doesn't submit my VAT until I'd say, I'm happy with this submitted. So it's like the paper trail is very important because there's nuances. But I always feel that the creative work, because it can, as I talked about, a sort of emotional expenditure, it can take over us because you're not necessarily thinking about, look, I've onboarded a client. I'm going to set up, let's say, a Asana board. We're going to itemize everything there. We're going to get a contract placed because you're thinking like, I've got tax bill to pay. This client's going to help me to do this. So I'm going to focus on the work and let's see, how quickly I can do this. Like I'm not necessarily thinking about the problems that I talked about a client that slipped through the net. Like we didn't have a contract. We didn't itemize. We didn't have a proper sign off. Like it was a mess. And you're thinking, it's going to pay off to take an hour to put everything in place, to set it up and go, you know what? I feel like I'm running my business a bit better because when I was writing Creativity for Sale, it's that sort of that vegan meme when you go guy who goes, and you're like, I want to tell everyone I'm vegan, but I can't. And it's just like, how do I not tell everyone, say, look, in every book, in every business book, it says, every sort of book on freelancing or creativity or business says, you know what? This is business because blatantly obvious. Yet in that hobbyist sort of mindset, kind of like dopamine intoxication, we're thinking like, hey, I am getting paid for sitting at home in my pants, creating posters. This is amazing. And then you realize, you know what? There's so much more that goes into it. I spent 42,000 words of just explaining how you can do this just to get to the starting line to do this properly. Set yourself up properly, and then you know what? You go again. Like what you created a year ago, you need to tweak. Like you need to still learn what's changing because with all my businesses, what worked a year ago or 2 years ago or 6 years ago doesn't work now. Everything's adapting, everything's changing. And as I said, we talked about it at the beginning, like knowing what you don't know doesn't apply anymore. The information is there, the breadcrumbs out there. You can actually learn what you need to learn and go with it, because yes, you need to work on yourself as a creative professional. Like John Mayer still does guitar tutorials, like famous musicians still practice, they're like athletes. They look after their craft, but they also like, you have to be understanding like who you work for, how do you do it, like who you're servicing and who do you want to work with and what you want to do. And I think that's inexcusable, because you can't plead ignorance these days.
And I think that going back to the project you said that was a bit of a disaster, I think firstly, it's okay to make those mistakes. They might be expensive mistakes, but the good thing is you'll probably just make them once. Like you adapted and tweaked things going forward. So I think if anybody's listening and they're maybe thinking, oh no, I'm doing things a bit wrong, or you're going to change and iterate on your business as you grow and become more mature. So it's okay to make mistakes, but hopefully you learn from them and put measures in place to prevent them from happening again.
If there's one message from my life of work, is you're not alone. Like everyone has the same mistakes. Everyone's got the same problems. They just look different. They might be a different language with different clients and different people, but all our careers are so much alike. Yet sometimes we can easily tell ourselves we are the only person with the problem right now in this moment. And as you said, like making the same mistake twice, what's that phrase? Like never step in the same river twice. Whatever was that quote, never get them right.
Whoa, lots of quotes.
Yeah, I put quotes in my books.
You must read a lot.
I do. They inspire me. Yeah, not making the same mistake twice. Like, of course, like that was the only client who slipped through net properly. And it was a very expensive chapter in my book. It's something that I've learned, and I've detailed the process for people to think, oh, that's what could happen, because you got lots of books on, look, show your work, still like an artist, life is great. We need those books. We need the inspiration, but ambition always meets the reality, and the reality goes, so you thought that could be the reality. It's not.
So is your new book quite practical then?
It's a guide on how to start and grow what I call a life-changing business. So I need to send you a copy so you can see it, but it's very much about speaking to the mind and the person. I don't obsess about sort of portfolio details and the kind of stuff. Is look, if you want to do this, you can do this, because the book starts with a chapter about me jumping into the waves in Bali. It's like a 7-foot waves with a surfboard, just getting wiped out, totally like making it back to the shore in no time, thinking, yeah, I thought I was a good surfer, but I wasn't as good surfer as I needed to be. And that's my life analogy of like, I think I can do this business because I can make a business card for a taxi driver or for mom's bakery or whatever. Then you realize you jump in and it's like, oh, the whole thing can just take you under, wipe you out and throw you back on the shore, thinking you need a little bit more information, you need a bit more experience, you need to do more work on yourself and get insurance at some place at some time, because things get real quickly. And I'm repeating myself, but the more framework and more groundwork and foundation you put into your business, you don't have to think about it. It's just the best bit.
Yeah. Do you know what I like about insurance? And it doesn't have to be through WithJack, right? Just go into any business insurance provider. So I can tell you now that statistically speaking, you're probably not going to have to make a claim on your policy, right? But I do know that every freelancer benefits from being insured, because it can really change the way that you speak with your clients. It can give you the confidence that you need to have difficult conversations with clients, or stand up to clients who are maybe trying to take advantage of you. So I think statistically speaking, you're not going to use the practical elements of your insurance, but every freelancer and creative person benefits from having it. I also think it's really cheap as well. We're talking about these products that can help you chase late payments. It costs about £5 a month for that. So yeah, I would just love for more creatives to consider the boring stuff like that. Like I say, it doesn't have to be through WithJack. This isn't an advert for WithJack, but just, look into it and get it sorted.
I think if there's one point to add, is from my experience, even from so far mid-career experience, that the bigger the work you go in for, actually some organizations and companies actually require you to have a business insurance and an indemnity insurance. It's because they want to make sure that if you actually fuck up, that you're covered, they know that they're covered. So it's easy to have a dream client list without the actual reality behind it, because you think you're going to do bigger stuff, bigger work with bigger organizations. But all of that requires a lot more behind the scenes to make sure that nothing goes wrong, because it's easy to think that, okay, you know what, I can jump the queue. I can go from a bedroom freelancer to being a branding studio in no time, but it does not. You need obviously personal experience, you need professional experience, and obviously having the right documents and the right sort of insurance policy in place is almost a must. You can't just hope for the best, because you have to be prepared for the worst, really.
Yeah, and it's not just clients that request it. Platforms like Juno and whatnot, they require you to have it too. But certainly if you make a mistake in your work, or the client perceives you to have made a mistake, which we find is the likeliest outcome, then they need to know that they can recover whatever expenses have been incurred as a result of that mistake from you. If you don't have insurance, you're putting yourself in a really difficult situation there. You're probably not going to have the funds to be able to dig yourself out of that hole. So that's where insurance comes in.
I think it's been very enlightening conversation. I'll just finish this conversation with one story, which is actually not mine, but it's a story of a friend of mine. He's quite shrewd, but he took on a project years ago, absolutely years ago, with a client that was, I'd say, client number 2, 3, or 4. And my friend is quite versatile. He's a producer, so he's decided to create this digital product for a client. And client briefed it, and it quite quickly became a nightmare. It was not necessarily scope creep, it was more like a sort of scope misunderstanding, because of what seemed quite easy on the outside, like that like surfboard, it's quite difficult on the inside to actually produce. And it got to the point where the project failed, and my friend was being sued for the loss of income by his client. What my friend did, he actually decided to wind down the company before the legal proceedings, just so he can get away from the issue. So that was his thing. Obviously, I believe that if you had a professional indemnity insurance, that could be then negotiated. I think that could be then worked out. And well, that's your insurance there. It's kind of like a heart-stopping moment when you realize that something that serious happens, because we never really think about stuff that could go wrong, especially have such a knock-on implications on sort of client revenue or work on their business operations, because we see that sort of as again, transactional value. Like, you needed this, I give you that, but I didn't really know it. So it's got so much bigger impact. And yeah, if someone decides after this conversation that they still don't need insurance, then I wish them all the luck. But I think from my experience, they should look up someone like your company, WithJack, and speak to you, because yeah, I feel safe with your insurance policy.
Yeah, and listen, I love talking about insurance. So people have a lot of questions about it, or so they should, because like we've said, these are complicated products. So even if you're not a customer, get in touch and ask me any questions you have about it, and I'd be happy to answer it. Like, my personal goal is to help as many creatives as possible. Yeah, any questions you have about insurance at all, just get in touch, and hopefully we can convey the value of it, because it is, I know I'm biased because I'm in the trenches and I see the problems regularly happening, but I would not run a business without it.
I think you mentioned before we started recording that you're looking at creating some video content and give more information to the public, and especially the creative public, about this. So I think once it becomes available, we'll be happy to share this. And because I think there's never really enough business information that you can have and know, because it makes you, as I always keep saying, like more multifaceted, more rounder, and kind of safer and more secure in what you're doing as a creative. Because I think if there's one thing, you want to be focused on being creative, it comes with everything else done. It's just like you cook your meal after everything's done and set up, and you're like, okay, I can now enjoy the meal, rather than going.
Well, keep an eye on our social media channels, because we are going to go big on the content this year.
Excellent. So where people find you? Is it WithJack? What's the website again?
So the website's withjack.co.uk. The Instagram, any social media channels are a little bit annoying because they have an underscore and then WithJack, just because it was difficult to get the handles for it.
Right. One last question. Don't think I've ever asked you that question. I'll let you go after this. WithJack, what's the name? Where did it come from?
So I named it after my dad, because he's the whole reason that I got into insurance. Like, I took over the family insurance business when I was 18, and then drove it into the ground. Didn't really do a good job of maintaining it or building it. But then when I went on to start my own insurance business, because he was the reason I got into it, I wanted it to have a nod back to him. So I'm not very creative or inventive with names, so instead I just named it after my dad. The little mascot you see on the website, that's based on him as well.
I was going to say, now it all makes perfect sense. So thank you so much. Ashley, thanks so much for your time. I think we can talk about for another 2 or 3 hours easily about these stories and what people could and should do. Thanks so much for your time. Great to have you on the show, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Thanks for having me. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Creativity for Sale podcast. The show was produced and presented by me, Radim Malinic. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil Mackay from 7 Million Bikes Podcasts. Theme music was written and produced by Robert Summerfield. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating or review. To get your own action plan on how to start and grow a life-changing creative business, you can get a copy of Creativity for Sale book via the links in show notes. As always, keep those creative fires burning, and until next time, I'm Radim Malinic, your guide through this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation, and the boundless potential within us all.